Welcome to the Productivity Show podcast, where we believe that you can get the important things done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Tan. I'm the founder and CEO of Agent Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Brooks Duncan. How are you today, Brooks?
I'm great. Just before recording, we were talking about taping your mouth closed while sleeping. So if you're not sure why we were talking about that, check a few episodes ago, TPS408, I believe. I have not done that, but I hear that's what the good thing to do is.
Yeah, a good reminder that I'm going to try this myself tonight because I need the extra sleep. So nice little nudge for myself to do this. But we're going to be talking about a completely different topic here today, and that is quitting social media. I'm sure as a productivity show listener, you've thought about what to do with social media, maybe even think about quitting social media altogether. I'm sure you have heard about different voices online and different thought leaders about you should totally stop using social media. You know, it's bad for you. It's going to distract you. It's like productivity kryptonite. And one disruption can literally throw off a whole afternoon. And, you know, there is one route to go to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to get rid of social media altogether. Someone like Cal Newport is a big proponent of that, right? He's the guy who wrote Deep Work and Digital Minimalism. And we even had him on the podcast a while back ago on TPS episode 88, where he makes the case that whatever benefit we think we get from social media is almost certainly not worth it. I actually beg to differ. I think there's actually a lot of value to social media, and there's a certain way you can use it without having to give it up altogether. Like, I don't want to be that person when someone meets me at a, let's say, dinner party or at an event and says, hey, let's stay in touch. What's your Instagram or LinkedIn? And I go, oh, I don't use any of those. You're just going to have to text me or something like that. I would rather use social media for certain cases like that. So you don't want to be that person that doesn't have one or miss out on opportunities, right? So how do you then go about using social media in a way that doesn't destroy your productivity and your attention span, but actually allows you to still stay focused and connected to the people that matter? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So what are some specific things we're going to be covering today, Brooks?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about how to set up guardrails to stop social media from taking over your focus and your life. That's number one. Number two, we're going to be talking about the number one rule to protect your time, energy, the number one rule to protect your time, energy, and attention from social media. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is we're going to talk about how to do a digital detox to disrupt your social media habit and regain your focus. So those are the three things we're going to be talking about today. In our next episode, Tan and I are actually going to be breaking down our personal productivity systems, talking about what we use for what and how it all works together. This is something we haven't done for quite a while, so I'm looking forward to that episode. And as always, we like to start our top three resources. So these are three things that we're loving lately that are making us more productive. So Tan, I hear you have three this time. So what do you got for us?
Yeah, I figured I'd stay on point. So the first one is a book called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. So that's the book I brought up earlier. The second one is an app called freedom.to. So you can go to the website freedom.to. It allows you to kind of block apps and tools and websites while you're working during specific times. So it allows you to focus. So it's a great tool that we always recommend. And then another one that we have here, the third one, is a book called Stolen Focus. So this is a relatively new book that came out in the last half year that is all about how to regain your focus in the world that we're currently living in. And I found it very helpful. I would actually prefer, and I recommend that you take the audiobook version of this. I think it's more entertaining than just reading this book. It's a little dry sometimes. So that's my recommendation. And you can find links to everything that we share on the show notes by going to theproductivityshow.com/412. So Brooks, let's kick it off, shall we? What's the first tip again?
All right. So like I said, tip number one is to set guardrails for yourself. And like Tan said, the Cal Newports of the world recommend that you don't do this and then you just quit it all cold turkey. So that's definitely one way to go. But if you don't want to do that for whatever reason, then we've got to put in some guardrails to make sure that social media just doesn't take over everything. And an example for me is, like any parent, I have kids that are teenagers, and like most teenagers, they are all about the TikTok. So I wanted to know what TikTok was about. I wanted to see what they're into. And it turns out there are great things on TikTok. We've even talked about it on the podcast a few times. But for me anyway, I found that there was no productive way to use it. It just was too addicting. So I put up a guardrail to myself, no TikTok. My son actually even requested a guardrail. He asked me to set up screen time for him so that he could only use it a certain amount of time per day. I thought that was a very mature thing to do. But the idea is you create rules, either self-imposed or enforced using some sort of technology, to limit how and when you use social media. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this, and only you know what is kind of like the one that will work for you. But some examples is you could only maybe use some of these apps or services at certain times a day. And you can either do that kind of the way I do it, which is just, I just intentionally do that. Or if you need to, you could use content blockers like my son requested I do. Another thing you can do is remove apps from your home screen so that you don't see them when you unlock. And what happens is if they're not there on the home screen when you unlock your phone, you're less likely to kind of default into them. That is something I have done. Another thing you can do is remove the apps altogether from your phone. So you still have access to them. This is actually something Cal Newport talks about in digital minimalism that you can do is you still have access to these services. You haven't like deleted them or anything, but you don't have the app. So you have to go to your web browser and log in, and just that friction is just enough to be annoying enough to make it not your default activity. Another thing you can do is use an alternative app that is less, I don't know the term, the less hooky. What I mean is the companies that make these apps, the whole reason that Twitter makes the Twitter app is to kind of suck you in, get you using Twitter more, and give you more ads. But in some cases, Twitter being one of them, there's actually third-party apps that strip a lot of that out. So the app I use on iOS is called Tweetbot. There's one on Android, which I've heard is pretty good, called Twidier. I don't know how to pronounce it. We'll have links to those in the show notes on Android. And they don't have all of the features of the native Twitter client, which to me is kind of a good thing. It just keeps it really simple, keeps your timeline in order, not algorithmic. And that is an option to make things less addictive. An example that James Clear gives in Atomic Habits, his book, is what he does is when he's in writing mode, he has his assistant change all his passwords for his social media accounts. So he literally can't log in. And then on the weekend, the assistant changes them back. So he can access them on the weekend, but he literally can't do it during the week. Some other things you could do. There's a browser plugin called the Newsfeed Eradicator. And what that does is it's for Chrome, and I think it works for Firefox and other browsers too, is when you go to facebook.com, it replaces the news feed with an inspirational quote. So if you want to use Facebook for things like specific groups, or maybe you need to do things for work, you can still access Facebook, you can still access your groups, but you don't get sucked in by what your grade 11 friend is doing on vacation or something like that. And you don't go down those rabbit holes. So those are some other things you can do. Another thing I recommend that you could do is if you're using Twitter, you probably have somebody that you follow on Twitter and you like their content. You're following them for a specific reason. Maybe you follow them for technology stuff or entertainment stuff, or whatever reason you're following this person, but maybe they retweet a bunch of stuff all the time that you really don't need to be seeing. You can actually turn off retweets from specific users. So just go into the settings. I think you have to log into the web browser for that, but that is a great way if you want to use Twitter but not get cluttered up by things. And then the final things I'll say is, if you, again, this is a Twitter thing, but one thing you can do is use Twitter lists. So what that allows you to do is totally curate your Twitter experience to only see the people and the things you want to see. So maybe you're following certain people, but you just want to see things related to maybe your local area, or related to technology, or related to whatever your area of interest is. You can create Twitter lists and just use those. And then you're really seeing a curated experience. You hear a lot of stuff, how Twitter is like a hellhole or whatever, and that is definitely there. But you can definitely curate your experience to only see the things that you want to see. So like I said, the guardrails that you use kind of depends on what you use and what you want to see. But you can use social media in intentional and controlled ways. You just need to be a little smarter about it. How about you, Tam? Do you set any like guardrails for how you use these social media services?
I think the one thing I do that I think everybody can use and it's free and thus doesn't cost you anything is simply to put your phone in a different room when you're working. So if your main station or home office is in one particular room, put your phone maybe even downstairs or in a different room. And by adding that friction, you're less likely to actually check your phone or just do those like just checks where you go, oh, let me just check Facebook real quick, or let me just check Instagram or Twitter real quick. And when you don't have your phone within arm's length, you just go, you know what, it's actually not worth it. Let me just continue to work on the things that I have to do. So I'm a big fan of just adding more friction to whatever I want to do less of. So if I want to check less social media, just add more friction to checking social media. So like you said, you can move the apps to the app library if you're on the iPhone. So they're not on your home screen. You like have to search for them. For example, that's another thing I do is if I don't want to be consuming a particular app that much, I'll just move it to the app library and then force myself to search for it so that that extra friction of typing in, swiping down, looking for it is oftentimes good enough for me to go, like, you know, I really should be doing something else. The one thing I just did learn from you is I didn't know that you can turn off retweets from particular users. That's actually something very handy because I don't use Twitter as much anymore. I actually deleted my account a few years ago because I wasn't using it as much. But I remember when I was on there that I was very particular who I followed, but I liked this particular person who was an author, and he or she, I won't name this person, had a book that he or she put out many years ago, and the only thing this person would do is write really good stuff, or herself or himself, but then every retweet was always like a testimonial or like some nice words about his or her own book. And I go, okay, after like a few months, I kind of get tired of like, you know, you pumping your own book and like, yes, I get it. People love it. I've read your book. It's good. But you don't have to, you know, remind people like myself all the time that you do this. So that's good to know that that feature exists. If I go back on Twitter, I might actually use that feature now because it's for people like that.
Yeah, we all have those people we follow who is like one tenth of the tweets are the you know, them being talking about the stuff, and then the other 9/10 are like retweeting politics outrage or something like that, which is fine if that's what you're into. But if it's not, yeah, you can turn that stuff off. In the live stream, we record these episodes live with our Productivity Academy members and our TPS Plus members. Nico gives a good tip, which is they say what they did is create a second profile on Facebook just for work and productivity group related stuff, just the stuff that they focus. So they log into Facebook with that and they only see that stuff. And then they don't get into the rabbit hole of friends and news feed and that type of stuff. So that's another thing you can do as well. And I like what you said too, because we always talk about friction as being a bad thing. Like you want to eliminate friction in your life and your work as much as possible. But there's certain cases where friction is actually a really, really good thing. And social media is definitely one of them.
Like another example where you can add friction is, so some people mention how they delete the apps on their phone, or so they have to use it on their desktop. So that's one way to do it. To add another friction point on top of that is, this is something I've done many times and still do this today, whether I have the apps on my phone or not, is let's say you go to Facebook, instead of staying logged in, just log out. And so when you have that tendency just to open up your browser and type in F and then, you know, enter to go to Facebook, you know, you just don't oftentimes even think about it, you just kind of mindlessly do it. When you see that screen that says, hey, you have to log in, you go, oh, like, okay, you know, what is my password again? Or, you know, if you have to log into LastPass that has maybe two-factor authentication set up, that, you know, you have to send a text message or you use a code on your phone, like it just adds more friction to logging in, right? So doing something like that is, I think, a great idea and something I still do to this day, and I highly recommend everybody do. So add more friction. I think it's a good thing. So that kind of wraps up our first point here, which is to set guardrails for yourself. Brooks, before we move on to the second point here and the second tip that we want to share with everybody, I want to give a quick shout out to all of our TPS Plus listeners, because This show is powered and sponsored by those who contribute to the Plus membership that we have here for the Productivity Show. So think of it as like an upgraded version of the podcast. So you can get our podcast episodes a week earlier. You get them ad free. You get some bonus material as well when you become a subscriber. And if you ever thought about, hey, I really love these guys from the Productivity Show and Marmel, I want to contribute somehow or help these guys out. And what can I do? Well, the best way to do that is actually to become a member of a TPS Plus subscription program. So this is where you get the upgraded experience from the podcast. And you can go to theproductivityshow.com/plus. So it's PLUS. And subscribe there. And there's a bunch of bonuses that are there that are available right now. So if you sign up and you become an annual member, you get one of our cool t-shirts as well. That's only available for annual members. So go check it out, theproductivityshow.com/plus. And thank you so much for everybody who has already been contributing and helping us out with that so far.
All right, let's move on to tip number 2. So tip number 1 was setting up guardrails. Tip number 2 is a rule that I really, really, really encourage you to take to heart and follow in pretty much 100% of the cases. And that rule is do not argue on the internet. You could call that like avoiding the outrage machine. And we gave an example of that, turning off retweets and stuff like that. But really, so much of the internet almost encourages you to go down these rabbit holes, again, we're using that term, of like getting into it with people, right? It's inevitable. If you use social media, you're going to come across people who you disagree with. And sometimes you really, really disagree with them. And sometimes, you're reading something and these people are very, very, very wrong. And it could be like somebody on Twitter. It could be somebody like your aunt on Facebook. It could be like a nosy neighborhood busybody on Nextdoor. I don't have that where I am, but that's what I understand. There's always people that you'll see things and you're just like, no, that's not right. And, I'm probably in a bit of a different situation than most people because my first experience with these online communities actually was way back in the dial-up BBS days. So, we used to phone in with your modem, tie up the phone line, and you'd be on these BBSs and you'd be arguing about things like local issues or Star Trek or, Windows versus Mac. Funnily enough, I was always team Windows in that. So I kind of got all that out of my system years ago. And now I have a really simple rule, which is no arguing on the internet, no matter what. And it's really difficult because people say a lot of crazy things. One of my favorite web comics is from XKCD, and the comic is called Duty Calls. And we'll put a link to it in the show notes because describing a comic is always a little difficult on an audio podcast. But basically, it's a guy sitting at his computer typing away. Someone else, or a person, I shouldn't say it's a guy. It's a stick figure. And there's a voice coming from the other room saying, "Are you coming to bed?" And the person at the computer says, "I can't. This is important." And the voice says, "What?" And it says, "Someone is wrong on the internet." Right. And, if you think about it, you read something that you disagree with, like you really, really disagree with it. But what happens if you engage with that person? You make some brilliant point to smack them down and you're like, yes, that's it. I'm so brilliant. But then what happens? You can't help checking back to see how they reply, or maybe you get notified. And so they reply. And then of course you have to like put them in their place again. So you reply, and it just becomes this complete waste of time, complete waste of energy, complete waste of attention. Really, I would encourage you. And this is like, we're talking about social media, but this is like anything online. It's just so easy to say things that you would never say to a person if you were sitting in a meeting with them. It could be emails at work, same sort of deal. But honestly, like focus on yourself. Sometimes, someone else being wrong on the internet, it really doesn't matter. Like what's going to happen if you walk away from that conversation? And the answer is nothing. You'll go on with your life. So really encourage you to set yourself free. Also, there's always the possibility, of course, that you're the wrong one. So kind of have to keep that in mind as well. Tan, I know you live in Austin, which is the South. I don't know if this is something people say in Austin because it's, kind of sort of the South, but there's this phrase in the my understanding, being in Canada, obviously I don't know anything, but my understanding is there's this phrase in the South that people use. It's like, bless your heart. And it basically means, I know you're wrong. You can't help being wrong, but guess what? I'm not going to get into it with you. I'm just going to walk away. So bless your heart. And I always love that. I never say it, but I think when I read this stuff, it's just like, bless your heart. Go on being wrong. It's okay. I'm just going to get on with my life. It's like a virtual pat on the head. Bless your heart. What about you, Tana? Did you have to quit Twitter because you were getting into it with people 24/7, or what's your policy on this?
Bless your heart. I've definitely seen that a few times. I don't know if it's a South thing or Southern thing, but I've definitely seen it a few times, both on my own feed from other people arguing with each other to people arguing with me. So I've seen it before. So I don't think I've ever seen it someone say in person, though. It's just like an internet kind of thing. And like you were saying, I completely agree with the whole internet arguing. I don't really engage with that. I've kind of stopped doing that over a decade ago. Just quickly realized like this is just a huge waste of time. I've lost sleepless nights over it sometimes, over very minuscule things, and just quickly realized it's just not worth it. So one of my personal rules is to never argue on the internet. And the only exception I will make is if I post something where I'm asking for feedback or I'm starting a discussion, that's when I will. But then I'm also doing it intentionally to invite that, right? So if you're friends with me on my personal Facebook, which typically only happens if I know you personally, I don't typically accept random people. Even if you're one of our most raving fans and customers, it's typically only for friends and family. So don't take it personally if I don't accept your friend request. But in those kind of situations, sometimes for fun and entertainment purposes, I will say something a little bit more controversial, and then see what comes out of it. And then I actually enjoy the popcorn scene where my friends are arguing with each other when I'm the one who started the whole thing. And I'm sure you've seen some of those, Brooks, and it's quite entertaining. But I also see a lot of those people in person. So it's kind of like an extension of what's happening in real life versus online and that kind of thing. So that makes it a little bit more personal. I would just personally never argue with someone over the internet when I don't know them, especially if they're anonymous. There's just no point in doing it. Right. But if it's my friend, someone that I personally know, also that I see in person, then I'm happy to do so. And sometimes that even leads to interesting discussions offline as well. Both we see each other at the bar or something and go, hey, remember that conversation we had about X, Y, and Z on Facebook? Like, here's where I think, or here's where I stand. And then it just makes it a little bit more fun. But with an anonymous person, that's just a complete waste of time. So I wouldn't even worry about that. If you're a content creator like we are, where you're publishing stuff, people will say stuff all the time that you're wrong, that that is garbage, that you don't know what you're talking about, or that you're selling out, and you're just trying to make money, or you're doing this for fame, or whatever it might be. Like, I've heard everything, honestly. So at this point, it's just not worth it. So don't let it hold you back from creating stuff. So if you're someone who's seeking to be a little bit more public, or you're trying to create content, or you're trying to be a little bit more of an influencer or content creator somehow, like, you're going to get those comments. Just don't lose sleep over it, honestly.
Yeah, your Facebook thing is kind of an interesting, actually a perfect example, because you're right, I have seen those things, but you'll notice I never ever reply. And the reason for that is because no offense, but some of the commenters say some pretty nutty things, and I follow my rule. Sometimes I'm about to type something, I'm like, nope, got to follow my rule. It's a very strict rule. But yeah, someone in the live stream here says, I have to admit, I do enjoy sometimes the nonsense. I see it as like break time and entertainment. So if you use that for break time and entertainment, that's a different story. But try your best not to get sucked into it too much. Would be my recommendation.
The doctor here, Dr. Tom, he says, my favorite statement is, I'm here for the comments. I think every now and then you can squeeze that in, Brooks. I think that would be a subtle nudge to go, hey, Tan, I see you there.
I like that.
All right, let's move on to tip number 3 here. So that is to do a detox. So this is something that I'm a big fan of. And the idea of a detox is just not related to skincare or anything, but a digital detox, meaning, what if instead of quitting social media altogether, you just take a break from it. So this is something I do at least once a year, sometimes multiple times a year, depending on the variations and intensity levels. So, for example, a good friend of mine, Noah, he's Jewish, Noah Kagan. He's been on our podcast before. You probably heard of his name. And what he does every Friday is Shabbat. So it's like a Jewish tradition where you kind of come together and every Friday, I believe, and you just turn off your phone. There's no technology or anything, and you just intentionally sit there with each other and enjoy each other's company. And we do that for an hour or so every now and then. So that's something like a really simple thing you can do as well, just to be intentional about, hey, I'm going to take a little break from it or a little detox. You could take it even a step further and say, hey, you know what? Every Sunday, I'm not going to use my technology whatsoever. Or what I do every now and then is to take 2 or 3 days off and just go in nature and just disconnect from the world and technology and internet altogether. And either do it with a significant other or with some friends. And it makes for great adventures and relaxation as well. So you can even start on a very miniature level and say, hey, you know what? As part of my shutdown ritual, as we like to call it here at AE, where you kind of like master the last 90 minutes of your day where you get ready for bed. The simple thing you can do there is to just turn off all your screens and turn off all your phones and tablets and anything else that's technology enabled, and just enjoy being in the present moment there. So there's all these different levels of detoxing you can do, whether it's on a daily, every week, or every quarter or something like that. But just think about like, what can you do? So personally, I like to turn off all my screens every single night before I go to bed. That helps me sleep a lot better. And then every Saturday or so, I try to be outdoors as much as possible. I'll still have my phone, obviously, but I don't want to be on the media at all, or on the internet, or any sort of platform. And then try to catch up maybe like Sunday or so. And then throughout the rest of the week, I put my phone away as much as possible. So I don't want it to kind of like run my life, right? So there's all these different ways you can do it, and just you have to find what works for you.
Yeah, like just we're going to reference Cal Newport's digital minimalism book again, but he talks about doing what he calls a digital declutter, but it's like an extreme version where you take a break from all what he calls optional technology for 30 days. And then at the end of that break, you kind of like reintroduce them one by one, but from a blank slate. And you decide like, okay, I'm going to be, say, just as an example, I'm going to be re-enabling my social media accounts, but instead of just doing it whole hog, he recommends doing it in an intentional way, which is putting up those guardrails, saying, okay, I need social media for X reason, or I just want it because I enjoy it. But here are the limits I'm going to set. Here are the uses for it I'm going to do. And then you're kind of like adding things back intentionally versus just like turning things on and off. So yeah, I think that, I mean, I personally can't see myself doing it for 30 days. But if that's something you want to do, go for it. I think your approach, Tan, of just taking like these short breaks, I think that's a great way to do it. I've never done a digital detox on purpose, by which I mean saying, I'm doing a digital detox and going away. It's always been as a result of somewhere, like maybe we're going on a trip and the place we're going has no wireless connectivity, no Wi-Fi, whatever. So it's kind of like worked out that way. And I got to say, it is very, very, very nice to do that from time to time. So I'm going to try and work more of that into my life, because I do think it has a lot of benefits.
To me, what that sounds like is you're going to take a train trip to Russia and Mongolia and the middle of nowhere more often.
Well, you know what? So I did do like I've said on the podcast, I did do the Trans-Siberian, but I had like more consistent internet access across the entire Siberia than I do like driving a couple hours out of Vancouver. So you say that, but honestly, I was way more connected there than I could be here if I drove the same, even remotely the same distance. So so yeah, getting out of the city for sure, at least in rural Canada.
I was gonna, offer you a suggestion of what to do to help you, but it sounds like it would be counterproductive. But if you are listening, you're thinking, hey, this sounds like a good idea of doing a digital detox. Like, any tips or recommendations? One, I would say, is be in nature as much as possible. I've done a few of these now, and I would say being in nature trumps everything. So yes, you can be in the city and be disconnected, but it doesn't feel quite the same level of like recovery or rejuvenation versus being in the woods, being in the wild, being up in the mountains somewhere, where part of it you're being forced not to use technology, right? And we always talk about how your environment is such a big component to behavior change. So that's something I would always recommend. And then if you're going with other people, make sure you get buy-in from the others as well. So it's kind of like half-ass if you disconnect completely, but your significant other is on the phone the whole time or watching TV or something, right? Like it's still affecting you in some shape or form. So if you're going to do it with another person or with a group, like make sure you get buy-in from everybody. And then, if you feel like you're struggling with this, like use some of the guardrails that we've talked about, like maybe install freedom.2 or something like that, or install some of the blockers, or delete the apps altogether before you go out, right? Or give someone your password and have them change it when you get back or something like that. Like there's a lot of creative things you can do there, but just try it out and see how it goes. I think you're going to thoroughly enjoy it and be very surprised of the benefits that come out of this. So that kind of wraps up today's episode. I really enjoyed this, and I think you're going to find this very valuable. So as always, we want to make sure we end it with one of our tips here to make sure that the next step is really easy for you. So what I recommend that you do next is implement one of the guardrails that we mentioned earlier in this episode and just follow it right away. Start it. Do it right away after this episode. Don't wait for it, because if you're going to wait for it, it's probably not going to happen. So if you feel like this is your calling, do it right after listening to this. And be sure to check back next week as well. We're going to be talking about our personal productivity systems. So we're going to give a behind the scenes look of how we do things personally and the apps and workflows and tools that we use. So we haven't done one of these in a while. So I'm really excited to kind of share all the new things I've been up to and that Brooks has been updating and working on as well. So be sure to check back next week. And everything that we mentioned today will be in the show notes. Just swipe up, you'll see it there. Or if you want to find them on the web, you can go to theproductivityshow.com/412. Thanks again, and we'll see you next Productive Monday.